The Paramount-Warner merger produced three sharply different regulatory responses. The Department of Justice cleared it. The European Commission cleared it with one narrow remedy. A coalition of states sued to stop it. The apparent disagreement concerns market definition. Should competition be measured among anticipated blockbusters, all wide-release films, or a broader group that includes independents and newer theatrical suppliers? But even if the states establish a narrow blockbuster market, another question remains: what should each studio's market share measure? Historical box office receipts capture commercial success, audience demand, and the strength of a studio's past slate. They do not directly reveal which distributor is an exhibitor's next best alternative, how often Paramount and Warner constrain one another in negotiations, or how much bargaining leverage theaters would lose after the merger. This is EconWorks. In this episode, we examine the difference between defining a market and measuring competition within it, and why the arithmetic of HHI can be much simpler than its economic interpretation.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are so glad you could join us today because, we have a really wild one to talk about.
Yeah, we really do. It's one of those situations that almost feels like a logic puzzle.
Exactly. So today, our mission is to examine this fascinating analytical piece from EconWorks. It's titled One Merger, Three Verdicts, and Two Questions About Market Power.
Right, and it's all centered on the proposed acquisition of Warner Bros. Discovery by Paramount Skydance.
Yeah, and we are going to look at how three completely different regulatory bodies looked at the exact same the exact same firms, the exact same market facts, and somehow arrived at three wildly different conclusions.
Which is, not something you see every day.
No, not at all. Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with a little timeline just to set the stage for you. So on June 12th, the Department of Justice looked at this deal and they cleared it. Full speed ahead. No divestitures required.
None at all. Just a clean bill of health from the DOJ.
Right. Then jump to July 22nd. The European Commission clears the deal too, but they attach this one very narrow specific remedy regarding a distribution arrangement.
A very surgical intervention, yeah.
And then, right in the middle of those two decisions, a coalition of state attorneys general sued to just block the merger outright.
Which, is a complete 180 from the DOJ's stance.
Exactly. Okay, imagine you're watching a football game, right? And there's this highly controversial play on the field. They go to the instant replay.
Well, I like this analogy.
Thanks. So you have three different referees looking at the identical video feed on the monitor. The first ref looks at it and calls a touchdown. The second ref looks at the exact same screen and calls a fumble. And the third ref throws a penalty flag. How is that even possible?
It really does seem impossible when you put it like that.
Hiccup.
But to make sense of this, we need to frame the underlying economic tension that the EconWorks piece really zeroes in on.
Right, because it's not just a disagreement over the law, is it?
No, not exactly. At first glance, sure, it looks like a classic, very familiar antitrust dispute over how you define a market. But as we're going to explore today, it's really a two-part mystery.
Two parts. Got it.
Yeah. The first part is simply deciding who gets counted in the market, drawing the battlefield. And then the second part, which is arguably much more important, is determining what that count actually means when it comes to real-world leverage.
Okay, so before we figure out who is winning this battle, we need to explain to the listener what game is actually being played here.
Exactly.
So let's transition into that first major question these regulators faced. What exactly is the product being sold? The states had a very specific view on this.
They did. The states built their entire lawsuit on a very narrow definition. They argue that the market here is strictly the distribution of anticipated blockbusters.
Anticipated blockbusters, so not just any movie.
Right, definitely not just any movie. They believe that legacy major studios like Paramount and Warner operate in this distinct, almost isolated arena that no one else can really touch.
Okay, but how does the source define a blockbuster? I know one when I see it, but legally, what does that mean?
Well, the source details very specific criteria for what makes a true blockbuster in the eyes of the states. First, it requires a massive production budget, which is then backed by an equally massive marketing campaign.
Which makes sense. You can't escape the ads for those things.
Exactly. It also mandates a wide national release, across thousands of screens simultaneously. And it demands extremely strong audience awareness long before opening day.
So usually tied to a proven franchise, right? Or some recognizable IP, like a comic book character.
Yep, almost always a recognizable intellectual property.
Okay, I want to push back on this a bit, just intuitively, because, I mean, isn't a movie just a movie?
I mean,
Like, if a theater is showing a film, aren't all the films just competing for my Friday night? It sounds like you're saying, or the states are saying, that a blockbuster is like a massive 5-star gala event, and a small indie film is just a local diner.
that's a really good way to put it.
Right. Because sure, they both serve food, and you can eat at both. But if a theater owner is trying to fill a massive 500-seat auditorium on opening weekend, the local diner just isn't a viable substitute. You can't just throw an indie flick on that giant screen and expect the same turnout. Is that why the states want this narrow definition?
Yes, exactly. In economic terms, they are arguing a lack of substitutability. You just can't swap in a quiet, low-budget drama for the next Batman movie and expect to sell the same mountain of popcorn.
Right. People aren't buying large sodas and candy for a slow-burn indie drama in the same way.
Exactly. And because those smaller films lack that substitutability, the states argue that these massive films exist in their own highly concentrated market. And that market is controlled by a shrinking number of these legacy studios.
Okay, that makes a lot of intuitive sense. But the DOJ and the EU looked at that exact same gala versus diner dynamic, and they just completely rejected the premise.
They really did. They see a much broader, much more dynamic competitive ecosystem.
But how? How do they justify a broader market if they agree that an indie movie isn't a blockbuster? Like, how are they looking at the board differently?
Well, the federal and international regulators argue that you can't just view the market as this static snapshot of legacy studios. They point out that independent producers, and especially newer firms like the massive streaming companies entering theatrical distribution, they increasingly matter.
Oh, like Apple and Amazon.
Exactly. They are incredibly relevant constraints on the traditional majors now. They are aggressively funding massive theatrical releases themselves.
But wait, how does a streaming company actually constrain a legacy studio in the real world? Like, are they just taking up screen space at the multiplex?
It's way deeper than just screen allocation. They fundamentally alter the barriers to entry and the input costs. Think about it. When Apple decides to fund a $200 million theatrical film, they bid up the cost of A-list directors.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and writers and actors.
Right. Paramount and Warner can no longer just monopolize the creative talent pool. The tech giants are writing massive checks.
So they're competing on the production side, not just the distribution side.
Precisely. And furthermore, these tech giants are training audiences to expect premium, high-budget content right on their living room TVs.
Which increases the opportunity cost for you, the consumer, when you're deciding whether to even leave your house on a Friday night.
Exactly. The DOJ and EU believe these newer players provide real competitive alternatives that severely limit how much actual market power those merging legacy companies can exercise.
Okay, so this is vital for understanding this whole dispute. If you accept the state's view, this narrow market, you are looking at a tiny, shrinking pool of blockbuster makers, and this merger looks highly concentrated and super dangerous.
Right. It looks like a monopoly in the making.
But if you accept the DOJ and EU's view, that concentration gets diluted immediately. Paramount and Warner are just two players in a much larger global arena fighting against massive tech conglomerates who have, frankly, way more money than they do.
That is the fundamental disagreement setting the stage. But, as the EconWorks analysis points out, this is only the first question.
Right, you mentioned a two-part mystery.
Yeah. Even if we grant the states a hypothetical victory right here, let's pretend a judge says yes, anticipated blockbusters are their own distinct market.
Case closed, right? The states win.
Not at all. That leads us directly into the second, much deeper question. How do we actually measure market share once that market is defined?
Ah, okay. The flaw in the numbers. Because the states use historical box office revenue to measure a distributor's importance, right?
They do. They use it as a proxy for structural concentration and power.
And on paper, that feels incredibly logical. Like, box office receipts are super visible. We see the numbers published every Monday morning. They're familiar. They're easy to compare.
What's fascinating here is that while box office revenue is treated like the ultimate scorecard by the states, it is deeply, deeply flawed as a measure of actual competitive significance.
Wait, really? Why? A dollar is a dollar.
Because box office revenue is what economists call a realized outcome. It is not a direct measure of a studio's forward-looking bargaining position or leverage.
Okay, explain that. What do you mean by a realized outcome?
It means it's a metric that only materializes after dozens of highly unpredictable, variable factors have interacted over a long period of time.
Oh, I see. What kind of factors does the source list?
So many. That revenue reflects the underlying quality and popularity of the film, which nobody can truly predict.
Right. Nobody sets out to make a flop.
Exactly. It also reflects the specific marketing spend for that title, the built-in strength of the franchise, and crucially, the release timing.
Like, was it an uncontested holiday weekend or a crowded summer month where 3 other action movies opened on the exact same day?
Yes. And it reflects how many screens and showtimes the exhibitors decided to allocate to it. Plus, ultimately, the totally unpredictable nature of audience word of mouth.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If I'm understanding this right, let's say a studio has a massive 40% market share this year simply because they had one extraordinary, completely unexpected hit, like a cultural phenomenon.
It's like Barbie or Top Gun,
Yeah.
Maverick, yeah.
Right. Does that massive pile of revenue automatically make them the exhibitor's most important, indispensable negotiation partner for the next year?
That is exactly the flaw in the logic.
Because isn't there a massive difference between a studio that gets lucky once with a cultural zeitgeist and a studio that consistently provides an important, reliable alternative across the entire year?
Yes, you hit the nail on the head. That is the core issue here. A high share of past revenue doesn't automatically mean that distributor is going to be the theater owner's most indispensable alternative in the negotiations happening today for the movies coming out tomorrow.
Okay, so to really explain why that forward-looking leverage is so critical, we need to move from these abstract spreadsheets of box office numbers and actually step into the room where theaters and studios do business.
The negotiation dynamics.
Right.
Because theatrical licensing is not a simple posted price market.
You don't just walk in, see a price tag on a shelf for the new Superman movie, and put it in your shopping cart.
No, not at all. It is a highly negotiated, aggressive process over a whole bundle of terms. They aren't just haggling over one number.
What exactly are they bargaining over then?
Well, they negotiate the distributor's share of the ticket revenue, the percentage split. They bargain over the sheer number of screens within a multiplex that will be dedicated to the film.
So whether it gets 2 screens or 5 screens.
Right. They also haggle over the timing and frequency of the showings. Who gets the prime Friday night 7:00 p.m. slot versus a Tuesday afternoon matinee?
Oh, that's huge.
And they mandate minimum run commitments. So the studio might legally obligate the theater to play the film for a set number of weeks, regardless of whether anyone is actually buying tickets.
Okay, I have to jump in here because we really need to highlight the theater's perspective, the exhibitor. Exhibitors aren't just passive buyers being bullied by big studios, are they?
No, they actually have a lot of structural power.
Because they control a resource that is fiercely scarce and highly perishable. It's exactly like an airline. Once the airplane takes off, an empty seat is lost revenue forever. You can't sell it tomorrow.
That's a perfect analogy.
Once that movie starts rolling at 7:00 p.m., an empty seat in that auditorium is a total loss. The theater owner is dealing with intense opportunity costs every single hour.
Exactly. A multiplex only has so many screens and only so many prime evening slots. The theater owner is forced to make really hard, strategic choices to maximize their yield.
So it's this mutual need. The distributor obviously has leverage because they're bringing the blockbuster, they're bringing the millions in marketing, and the manufactured audience demand.
Right, the fans are lining up outside.
But the exhibitor has leverage too because they control the physical bottleneck. They decide which films get the biggest auditoriums with the giant screens and the premium sound, and how long the film gets to stay in that prime rotation.
Right. The issue here isn't whether this high-stakes bargaining exists.
Yeah.
Everyone, the states, the DOJ, the EU, they all agree this negotiation happens.
So what's the actual sticking point?
The real economic question is this. Does keeping Paramount and Warner separate materially improve the alternatives available to exhibitors in these specific week-to-week negotiations?
I see. So if the exhibitor doesn't like Warner's terms, can they credibly threaten to walk away and give those screens to Paramount instead?
Exactly. If Paramount and Warner frequently serve as the closest substitutes for each other, if they are constantly undercutting one another to win screen space on a Wednesday afternoon, then merging them would genuinely reduce competition.
That would definitely harm the theater owner's leverage.
But if they aren't actually constraining each other in those specific negotiations, maybe because their release schedules rarely overlap or their movies target totally different demographics, then simply adding their historical box office shares together on a spreadsheet vastly overstates the real-world danger of the merger.
Wow, okay. That brings us to the core economic dispute. Let's circle back and synthesize why these three distinct regulatory bodies arrived at three totally separate verdicts based on this exact same data.
Yeah, let's recap those philosophies.
Start with the states.
So the states are relying heavily on historical structure. They look backward. They fundamentally believe that the legacy major studios remain uniquely special and that they are the only ones capable of consistently supplying blockbusters at scale.
Because of that, combining them looks like a disaster for competition.
Right. Now, contrast that with the DOJ. The DOJ views the industry as highly dynamic. They believe that using historical box office shares exaggerates the entrenched power of these old studio labels.
Because they're looking at the tech shift.
Exactly. In a world where Apple and Amazon are aggressively changing consumer behavior, the DOJ determined that the competitive constraints are coming from outside the traditional studio system now.
And then we have the EU sitting right in the middle.
The EU took a very balanced, surgical approach. They were comfortable with the DOJ's wider view of a dynamic competitive set, but they insisted on one narrow behavioral remedy to preserve the independence of a specific distribution channel.
They wanted to protect the local supply chain for smaller European productions, right?
Yes, ensuring the newly combined mega studio couldn't use its size to choke off theater access for smaller, independent European films.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Whether you are analyzing a corporate merger in your own industry, or evaluating business metrics, or honestly just trying to read the news critically, this deep dive proves a vital rule.
Now, what's that?
Market definition tells us who gets counted, but it does not tell us what the count actually means.
That is so true.
Just because a number like historical box office is highly visible and really easy to graph on a chart, it doesn't mean it's the right metric for understanding actual power dynamics in a negotiation room.
The defense's best strategy in this whole antitrust case wasn't to try and win every single academic point about market definition.
Right, they just needed to cast doubt.
Exactly. They just had to cast rigorous, logical doubt on what the state's chosen metrics actually meant for the future. They proved that a realized outcome is not a weapon you can wield in a negotiation.
Well, thank you so much for joining us to untangle this incredibly complex web of market power. But before we go, I know you have a final provocative thought for us to mull over on our own.
I do, yeah. Building on this whole idea that box office revenue is a poor metric for bargaining power, I want to raise a new angle for you to think about.
Oh, I love a good thought experiment. Let's hear it.
If the DOJ is right, and streaming companies entering theatrical distribution are the new, massive competitors, how on earth do regulators measure leverage going forward?
Because they don't play by the same financial rules, do they?
No, they don't. Legacy studios rely on theatrical ticket sales to turn a profit on a $200 million movie. But what if an entrant like Apple views a massive theatrical release not as a profit center, but just as a loss leader?
Wait, a loss leader to do what?
To drive platform subscriptions. What if these new players don't even care about box office revenue? What if they're willing to lose $50 million at the box office because the cultural buzz generates $100 million in lifetime value from new monthly subscribers?
Oh, wow. If the two sides of the negotiating table are playing completely different financial games, then traditional market shares might become entirely obsolete.
Exactly. How do you measure market power when the biggest players might not even care about the primary metric?
That is a wild concept to think about. The referees aren't just disagreeing on the replay. They might literally be watching entirely different sports.
They really might be.
Well, it is a stark reminder to never take the easiest, most visible metric at face value. Keep questioning the numbers you see in the headlines, and keep looking for the actual leverage in the room. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Econ Works. The goal of this series is to move beyond the surface-level descriptions of how markets work and start looking at the actual architecture of competition. We'll be back soon with another look at where the law and economics meet the market. For the full technical analysis and more from this series, visit us at econworks.com. If you found today's breakdown valuable, please subscribe and share the show. It helps us keep the analysis independent. From all of us here at Econ Works, thanks for listening.